So consciousness has a few different meanings. Spiritually enlightened people and scientists use this word differently.
I would say the brain does not create consciousness. That is something a lot of scientists, those interested in neuroscience, are far along that pathway now. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. In fact, no neuroscientist on earth can give the first sentence to explain the mechanism by which the physical brain creates consciousness.
I don't think there's any consciousness or soul or awareness that exists outside of our physical brains. This is a very difficult question to answer. Extraordinary claims are made on both sides. The molecular people like me and the spiritual people like others. But there's no reason to think, for me, there's no reason to think there's something beyond the physical brain.
A lot of people are using this, oh, you have consciousness, you can respond to me. Medical doctors are using it in this way. But that's only one meaning of the word. So when you hear a spiritual teacher use the word consciousness in a context like everything is consciousness, we are made of consciousness, suddenly this may sound strange, because if we're thinking of the meaning in the first way that we use it, well, we have consciousness, that means I'm awake and I'm able to perceive and my senses are working. Okay, so that means I have consciousness. And then if someone says everything is made of consciousness, it doesn't quite make sense logically, because having consciousness doesn't seem to have anything to do with the world being made of consciousness. So there's kind of a jump there.
It's more complicated than that, because there's obviously subcortical structures all the way down to the spine that are involved heavily in what consciousness is. It's not merely a consequence of cortical activity. You know, we tend to think that because human beings have massively expanded cortical structures, and we think of ourselves as the most conscious creatures, and that's reasonable, but you can take an awful lot of cortex off someone and they're still conscious. In fact, you can leave them with almost no brain at all and they're still conscious. So we really have a rough time trying to figure out what consciousness is and how it's related to brain structure.
First of all, the nature of the language that we are speaking, I'm talking about the English language. This language is very good for describing and defining external things, but is very limited when it comes to internal dimensions of many aspects of who we are. So, if we have to use yogic terminology for this, what you're referring to as consciousness is considered as jagrati, that means wakefulness. We do not consider wakefulness as consciousness. Wakefulness is the state of the body, wakefulness is the state of the mind, wakefulness is the state of the bioenergies within us, but that's not consciousness. What you're seeing as physical body, well, one thing I would like to clarify is, we do not look as brain as a very significant aspect, because we see intelligence is right across the system. Generally, in most people's understanding, I believe, a combination of memory and intelligence is considered as mind. Am I right on this? If you take this as a definition, it is a fact that every cell in our body carries millions of fold much more memory than the entire brain can carry. Because these cells in the body remember even what happened 1,000,000 years ago. It remembers the skin tone of your forefathers from 1,000,000 years, nothing has changed. It never gets confused.
You can have a completely objective science, a science where you make objectively true claims about a domain whose existence is subjective, whose existence is in the human brain consisting of subjective states of sentience or feeling or awareness. So the objection that you can't have an objective science of consciousness because it's subjective and science is objective, that's a pun. That's a bad pun on objectivity and subjectivity. You can make objective claims about a domain that is subjective in its mode of existence.
It is consciousness alone that knows consciousness. Consciousness assumes the form of the mind in order to objectifies its potential in the form of manifestation. It needs the activity of mind in order to know manifestation. But in order to know itself, consciousness need not assume the form of mind. It knows itself by itself, through itself, in itself, alone. And it is for this reason that there will never be a science of consciousness. A science of experience, yes. But a science of consciousness, no. If by science we mean an activity of thought and perception, in other words, an activity of mind, it is impossible for mind to know its own essence, although mind is, of course, only made out of that essence. The mind that seeks consciousness is like a character in a movie that travels the world in search of the screen. She never finds the screen in her world, and yet everything she finds is made of the screen. Likewise, science, if by science we mean an activity of thought and perception, will never find consciousness in the field of thought and perception, although everything it finds is made of consciousness. In the form of mind, it will never know consciousness because the mind superimposes its own limitations on everything that it perceives, and whatever it perceives, it experiences in accordance with its own limitations.
But what I'm discovering is that it's not one or the other. You know, it depends on which level you're speaking in terms of your experiential reality. Because if this is all just language and it's all just concepts, then what good is it? So it's not about proving anything. Okay. So I've put together some of these different speakers to trying to also demonstrate how we learn when we keep our minds open and we don't draw conclusions, and how we stop learning when we believe that we have a conclusion that we're certain of, that we know. And it could be on both sides. It could be on the side of consciousness is produced by the brain. That could keep you from learning. And it could be on the side of the brain appears in consciousness. That could keep you from learning. So the point is how to not get stuck in any space where you shut down your openness to learning. So one of the ways to do this is to notice how people use language. Are they using it to prove something they think they already know? Or are they using it to explore and to ask questions?